When I came out to my mother in 1990, her first words of advice were to not tell anyone. She said being gay could hurt my nascent career. The reaction was as painful as it was understandable. Back then, the world was a very different place for a 20-something LGBTQ American. When I was the age of today's Generation Z, being an identity that wasn't heterosexual meant living in a nation that was neither tolerant nor accepting. Even in a gay mecca such as New York, the few of us who were out of the closet were still seen as courageous. So imagine my pride in seeing Gallup's new data showing more and more Americans publicly embracing their sexual orientation and gender identity. 10 years ago, 3.5% of U.S. adults self-identified as LGBTQ. Today, it's a record 7.1%. And yes, it's largely Gen Z that's driven the increase in the figure. Gallup reports that roughly 21% of Generation Z Americans who've reached adulthood, those born between 1997 and 2003, identify as LGBT. That means the oldest among them is only 25. As an out gay Gen Xer who's watched successive generations come out earlier and earlier, I am in awe of the ease with which members of Gen Z seem to confidently glide through this world. They still face challenges, but those challenges only compound my awe. In Texas, some gender-affirming care for trans youth is now considered, quote, child abuse, and Governor Abbott has issued an odious directive to state agencies to investigate said abuse. In Florida, the legislature is busy pushing through an irresponsible measure dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill, which forbids discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity in schools. And despite nationwide marriage equality, LGBTQ Americans can still be fired or denied housing and education. As the Human Rights Campaign noted this week, basic freedoms are missing in 29 states for LGBTQ plus Americans. Progress remains slow, even grudging. But so much has changed since I was Gen Z's age back in the, I love that picture, back in the 90s. Same-sex couples can legally marry. LGBTQ people work at all levels of the federal government, including the cabinet, with Pete Buttigieg serving as our Married with Children Transportation Secretary. Popular culture is filled with LGBTQ representation, too. And I'm out. A columnist at The Post, a contributor to PBS NewsHour, and an anchor here at MSNBC. I'm thrilled my mother was proved wrong, and so is she. Perhaps the best thing today's LGBTQ Americans have that my generation didn't when we were 25 is public support. When the Don't Say Gay bill made news, the President of the United States tweeted condemnation. Hours after Abbott's order in Texas, Beto O'Rourke, who's now running for governor, tweeted, "To every trans kid in Texas, you're amazing. You belong right here in Texas." Of course, actions have always spoken louder than words. But this Gen X gay man is old enough to remember when we had to fight as hard as we could just for the words. The arc of our moral universe started to bend when we not only demanded to be acknowledged, but also demanded equal justice under the law. The fight for equality is nowhere near over, but a world in which 21% of Gen Z is comfortable identifying as something as other than heterosexual shows that it's not just beginning either.